He was supposed to be my partner, my equal. But when I was at my weakest, facing the collapse of everything I had worked for, he made a decision that shattered me. He thought he could take my business, my future, and leave me with nothing. What he didn't know was that I had already planned my revenge, and I was about to take back everything he thought he could steal. I sat in my office, staring at the paperwork in front of me, my mind racing. The business I had spent the last 5 years building was in jeopardy. My husband, Mark, had always been supportive, at least that's what I thought. But everything changed when he casually mentioned that he wanted half of it, as if I hadn't poured my heart and soul into every single part of it. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, but I refused to let him see how shaken I was. "I'm taking control of the company, Sarah," he said, his voice cold, detached. "You've never been good with the business side anyway. You'll be fine with a smaller role. I'll handle the important decisions." My stomach churned. My hands trembled as I gripped the pen in front of me. How could he? How could he even think that after everything? After all the late nights, the sacrifices, the blood, sweat, and tears I had put into this company. Did he really believe that I was just some pawn in his game? He must have thought I was weak, that he could pull the rug out from under me and I wouldn't fight back. But he underestimated me, deeply. I wasn't about to let him take everything I had worked for. Mark might have believed he could take control, but what he didn't know was that I had already planned for this. Every step, every strategy was already in motion. I had my own cards to play, and I wasn't about to fold. But for now, I stayed silent, nodding as if I accepted what he said. I'd keep my cards close to my chest, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I wasn't just fighting for the business. I was fighting for my dignity, for everything I had built, and for my freedom. I was about to show him just how wrong he was to think he could take everything from me. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, tense meetings, and sleepless nights. Mark, who used to be my partner in every sense, had become a stranger to me. He started to take over, showing up to meetings I had arranged, making decisions I had worked tirelessly to plan, and pushing me aside with every opportunity he got. Each time I tried to speak up or assert myself, his dismissive attitude made me feel smaller, more invisible than ever. His actions cut deeper than any words could. I watched as he took over my role in the company, sitting at the head of the table, making decisions as if I was just an assistant. The business that I had sacrificed so much for was slowly slipping through my fingers, and it felt like the walls were closing in. But behind the scenes, I wasn't just watching. I was calculating. I knew this wasn't just a simple argument or a temporary phase. This was an attempt to erase everything I had worked for, and I couldn't let it happen. I started gathering information, reviewing contracts, looking through financial records, and consulting with a lawyer. Slowly, I began to understand the weaknesses in Mark's position. He thought he could outsmart me, take control without facing any consequences. But what he didn't know was that I had been paying attention. I had noticed the inconsistencies, the areas where his actions didn't line up with what was legally protected. While Mark was busy acting like the boss, I was quietly building my defense, step by step. I knew I had to play this smart. One wrong move, one misstep, and I could lose everything. So, I kept my head down, stayed focused, and waited for the right moment to strike. Weeks passed, and I could feel the pressure mounting. Mark's grip on the business tightened with every passing day, but I refused to let him see my growing resolve. At night, I would sit at my desk, reviewing every legal document, every detail of our partnership, every clause that could give me leverage. I couldn't risk him knowing I was planning something. He had always seen me as the emotional one, the one who would fold under pressure. But he had no idea how much I had changed, how much I had learned in the years since we started the business together. I had made a plan, and now it was time to execute it. The first step was to protect myself. I called a lawyer, one I had worked with in the past for some personal matters, and started discussing options. We talked about what would happen if Mark tried to claim ownership of the business without my consent, and how I could legally fight back. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to protect everything I had built. Meanwhile, Mark continued his attempts to undermine me. He started telling our employees that I was no longer capable of handling the business, that I wasn't as involved as I used to be. He tried to convince them that I was only interested in the profits while he was the one doing the hard work. It stung to hear the lies, but I knew it was just part of his manipulation. What he didn't realize was that each false statement, each move he made, was only strengthening my resolve. His arrogance was his downfall. I had been quietly documenting everything: emails, phone calls, and texts. I wasn't going to let him destroy me without proof. The breaking point came one afternoon when Mark, in front of a room full of employees, announced that he was taking full control of the business moving forward. His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to oppose him. "I'm going to make this company grow," he declared, looking at the team with false confidence. "And I'm going to make it successful, without all the emotional drama that comes with her approach." The room fell silent, and I could feel the weight of every gaze on me. His words were meant to humiliate me, to strip me of my power in front of everyone. But instead of breaking down, something inside me snapped. That night, I called my lawyer again, a sense of clarity settling over me. I had been patient long enough. I had been calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Mark thought he could take everything I built and leave me with nothing. But what he didn't know was that I had secured everything legally. The business wasn't just his, it was mine. I had put everything in place, from a restructured ownership plan to hidden assets that he had never bothered to check. There was no way he could take it all without facing serious legal consequences. I wasn't just going to let him walk away with the company. I was going to show him exactly what it meant to underestimate me. The next day, I walked into the office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Mark was waiting for me in his usual smug posture, but I could see the hint of uncertainty in his eyes. I had the upper hand now. I called him into the conference room, and when he sat across from me, I slid a thick folder across the table. "I'm sure you've been enjoying your takeover of the business," I began, my voice steady. "But I'm afraid it's not as simple as you think. I've been working on a few things myself. So, here's what happens next." I watched as his face went pale, his confidence starting to crumble. I leaned back in my chair, watching as Mark's face shifted from confusion to panic. I could feel a sense of triumph rising within me, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I watched him, every small twitch of his expression, every flicker of doubt in his eyes. The thick folder in front of him contained everything: evidence of the legal protections I had put in place, proof that I had been one step ahead this entire time. "You see, Mark," I said calmly, "I didn't just sit back and let you take control. While you were making your moves, I was ensuring that my rights were protected. This business isn't just yours. It's mine too, and I've secured it." His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the papers, his arrogance completely vanishing with every page he turned. He tried to regain his composure, but the cracks in his confidence were undeniable. "You can't just do this. We built this together, Sarah. It's ours." His voice was shaky now, a far cry from the assured tone he had used just weeks before. I could see the desperation creeping into his words, but I wasn't moved by it. He had never once considered how I had built this company from the ground up, how every decision, every late-night phone call, and every early morning I had sacrificed had made this business what it was. All that mattered to him was control, not the years of work I had poured into it. You didn't build this, Mark. We built this, but I did the work that kept it running. I've sacrificed everything for this company, and I'm not letting you take it from me, I said, my voice firm, the confidence I had found in myself reflecting in my words. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. The lawyer is already handling this, and if you try anything, you'll face serious consequences. We can either work together as partners, or you can leave. Your choice. I stood up, pushing the chair back with purpose. Mark sat there, stunned into silence, his mind clearly racing. This was the turning point. He had expected me to back down, to let him take over without a fight. But now it was clear I was no longer the woman he could control. The days that followed were tense. Mark, who had always been the one to make decisions, was now on the defensive. He had underestimated me in the worst way. I could feel the weight of the situation, the constant stress of watching my every move, knowing he was still plotting his next move, but I no longer felt vulnerable. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control. I had made it clear that I wasn't just going to hand over my business, my life's work, without a fight. Mark started to make subtle threats, trying to intimidate me into backing down, but they didn't work. Each time he attempted to manipulate the situation, I remained calm and collected. I had already positioned myself in a place where he couldn't win without facing consequences. The legal papers I had filed were airtight, and now that I had the full support of my lawyer, I was in a position of power. One evening, after a particularly cold conversation in the office, I decided to take a step further and show Mark just how serious I was. I made a phone call to a trusted friend of mine who worked in corporate law. She'd been with me from the beginning, helping me structure the business in a way that could withstand any personal betrayal. I needed to make sure that I was completely protected, not just emotionally, but legally as well. Sarah, you've been smart, but you need to understand something, she told me over the phone, her voice filled with concern. If you want to fully ensure your business stays yours, you need to make the move now. He'll drag this out if you let him. He'll try to manipulate the court, try to make you look unstable. He's already shown his cards. He won't back down without a fight. Her words echoed in my head, and I knew she was right. Mark wasn't just going to walk away, not without creating chaos first. But I wasn't scared anymore. I had come too far. This wasn't just about protecting my business anymore. It was about taking back my life, my self-respect, and showing myself that I could stand up for everything I had worked so hard for. The next morning, I called my lawyer and instructed him to move forward with filing the necessary motions. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the offense. The legal battle began in earnest, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. I could feel the weight of every decision I made as my lawyer, and I prepared for court. Mark was doing everything he could to delay the proceedings, hoping to wear me down. He tried to portray me as an unstable partner, claiming that I was overreacting, that I was too emotionally involved in the business to make rational decisions. But none of his tactics worked. I had the facts on my side, and every time he tried to manipulate the situation, I stood firm, unwavering. I couldn't help but think back to how things had been before all of this. When Mark and I had started the business, it was supposed to be a partnership. We had dreams of building something together, something that would last. But somewhere along the way, his ego grew too big, and I became just another asset to him. He didn't care about what I had sacrificed, what I had contributed. He only cared about winning, about having control. But now, as I sat in meetings with my lawyer, working through the strategy, I realized how far I had come. I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who put everyone else's needs before her own. I had learned to trust myself, to rely on my own instincts, and to believe in the work I had done. I wasn't going to let Mark take that away from me. The day before the court hearing, Mark reached out to me again. This time, it wasn't through text or email. It was a phone call. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he was trying to manipulate me into thinking he was reasonable. "I've been thinking about this, Sarah," he said. "We both know this business is ours. All I'm asking for is a fair split. We'll work together, figure out a way to make it work. I don't want to fight. Let's be partners again." I could hear the desperation in his voice, but I wasn't fooled. This wasn't about partnership. It was about control. He had underestimated me for far too long. I could feel the anger rising within me, but I kept it in check. "You had your chance, Mark," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You wanted to take everything from me, and now you'll have to deal with the consequences. I'm not giving up without a fight, and I won't let you win this time." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. There was no turning back now. The battle was on. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and determination. As I walked into the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything I had fought for: the business, my self-respect, and my future. I had spent years building this company, putting in the long hours, the sacrifices, and the countless decisions that had made it successful. Now, I was about to defend it in front of a judge, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. Mark was sitting across the room, looking calm and collected as usual, but I could see the tension in his eyes. He was used to being in control, to having the upper hand, and now he was realizing he didn't. As the proceedings began, I sat quietly, listening as our lawyer laid out the case. The documents I had gathered, the legal protections I had set in place, and the evidence of Mark's attempts to take over. All of it was presented with precision, each detail backing up my position. Mark's lawyer tried to spin the story, painting me as an irrational business partner who was incapable of handling the responsibilities. They tried to argue that the business would be better off if Mark were in charge, but every argument fell flat. My lawyer was quick to counter each claim, showing how Mark's actions were detrimental to the company and how his desire for control was rooted in selfishness, not in what was best for the business. As the hearing continued, I could feel my confidence growing. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The years of working in the shadows, of staying quiet, and putting up with Mark's manipulations had prepared me for this moment. I wasn't just defending my business. I was standing up for myself. I wasn't going to let him take away everything I had worked for, and I wasn't going to let him destroy my self-worth any longer. The judge's decision came swiftly. The ruling was in my favor. Mark would not be taking control of the business. The legal protections I had put in place were solid, and the judge recognized the validity of my claims. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I had won. The aftermath of the court ruling was both a relief and a wake-up call. Mark, who had once been my partner, now stood as a stranger in my eyes. The victory in the courtroom felt hollow, as if it was just one more battle won in a war that had already taken too much from me. But even so, the sense of freedom that followed was undeniable. I had taken control back, not just of the business, but of my life. I no longer had to live in the shadow of someone who thought they could erase everything I had worked for. Mark's reaction to the court's decision was expected: resentment and anger. But it wasn't his opinion that mattered anymore. It was my own. For the first time in years, I could breathe again. The weight I had been carrying, the constant pressure to please, to prove my worth, was lifted. It felt like I was finally reclaiming the pieces of myself that had been buried under years of compromise. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild, not just my business, but my personal life as well. I surrounded myself with people who valued me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. My friends, my colleagues, the employees who had always believed in me, these were the people I needed. These were the ones who had been there for me when Mark had pulled away, when the business felt like the only thing I could hold on to. I took the time to reflect on everything I had been through. The relationship with Mark had been built on false promises, on a partnership that had never truly been equal. He had always seen himself as the dominant force, the one who could control everything. But what he hadn't realized was that my strength was never dependent on him. It was never about what he could take from me. It was about what I could build for myself. And I had done that despite all the obstacles, despite his attempts to tear me down. In the end, I knew that this victory wasn't just about the business. It was about me finding my voice, my worth, and my power once again. And that, more than anything, was what made me unstoppable. Months passed, and life started to feel normal again. The dust had settled from the legal battle, and while Mark continued to find ways to make himself heard, whether through angry emails or occasional confrontations, I had moved on. The business was thriving under my leadership, and I had regained the confidence I had once lost in the chaos of our marriage. My days no longer revolved around Mark's whims or his attempts to control me. They were filled with decisions that were mine to make, victories that were mine to claim. One evening, I received a call from an old friend, someone who had watched me struggle in the past and had always believed in my potential. She was a mentor who had encouraged me from the very beginning, and her voice on the other end of the phone reminded me just how far I had come. "Sarah, I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. I've been following your progress, and you've not only managed to keep the business, but you've made it stronger than ever. Your story is an inspiration to so many." Her words resonated with me in a way that nothing had before. This wasn't about the business or the money. It was about the strength I had discovered in myself. I had faced the ultimate test, and not only had I survived, but I had also come out victorious, stronger and more determined than I had ever been. That night, as I sat at my desk, looking over the future plans for the company, I realized something. This wasn't just a story of reclaiming what was mine. It was the story of rediscovery. It was the story of a woman who had lost herself in the roles of wife, partner, and caretaker, but had found her power again through the courage to stand alone. The freedom wasn't just in the business I had saved, but in the life I had started to build for myself, on my own terms. I had learned that no one could ever take away what was mine unless I allowed them to, and I wasn't about to allow that anymore. Mark had underestimated me, but in the end, it was my own resilience that carried me through. I didn't just take back the business. I took back my life, my identity, and the self-respect that had always been mine, hidden beneath years of compromise. And for the first time, I was truly free.